The year was 1868, and the wind that swept through Redemption Creek carried the sting of old gunfire and the whispers of broken promises. Dust rose from the main road, curling around the wooden storefronts like restless ghosts, clinging to every windowpane, every silent porch. A church bell rang once, hollow and lonely, its echo fading into the distant hills. On the edge of town, where the land stretched barren and dry, a woman stood with a letter pressed to her chest, its paper worn thin, its ink faded to the color of dried blood. Clara Boone had waited 3 long years for that letter's promise to come true. She'd waited through droughts and sandstorms, through nights when the coyotes howled and the stars felt close enough to burn her skin. She was not a woman of weakness, but of stubborn faith, the kind that carves itself into the bone. And yet, as another day bled into dusk, that faith was beginning to taste like ash. Every man in town knew her story. The saloon keeper whispered it between whiskey pours. The barber told it to drifters needing a trim. "That's Clara Boone," they'd say, nodding toward the lone figure by the well, still waiting for the outlaw who swore he'd come back clean. Some said it with pity, others with mockery, but none dared say it within her hearing. She had a look in her eyes that could stop a man mid-sentence, half sorrow, half steel. The air was heavy with the smell of horses and tobacco, the sun a merciless coin burning low in the sky. The road shimmered in the distance, empty except for the swirling dust. Then, faintly came the sound, hoofbeats. Slow, deliberate. Clara froze. Her fingers clenched the letter until it tore. The sound grew closer, echoing against the clapboard walls. A lone rider emerged from the haze, his hat brim low, a rifle slung across his saddle. He moved with the kind of weariness that only comes from killing or running, or both. The townsfolk turned, muttering. Someone spat. The piano inside the saloon stumbled to a stop. Clara's heart pounded hard enough to make her dizzy. There was something in the way the rider sat his horse, something achingly familiar. But as he drew near, the light caught his face, and she saw the years carved into it like scars across old wood. He reined in his horse in front of her, silence thick between them. The wind tugged at the hem of her dress, lifting the dust into her eyes. He dismounted slowly, boots thudding against the dry earth. His hand brushed the brim of his hat. "Miss Boone," he said, voice low and roughened by distance. Her breath caught. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times. How she'd run to him, how she'd curse him, how she'd finally know why he left. But standing there, looking into eyes she barely recognized, she found no words at all. He took a hesitant step forward. "You remember me?" She swallowed hard. "I remember the man who promised he'd come back clean. I don't know what stands before me now." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, gone almost as soon as it came. "Fair enough," he murmured. He looked around the town, its quiet streets lined with men pretending not to stare. "Doesn't look like much has changed." "Everything's changed," she said. "You did that." The sound of her own voice startled her, steady, sharp, full of years of anger she'd buried beneath her waiting. He nodded, jaw tight. "Maybe I did." He pulled a small, tarnished locket from his pocket and held it out to her. "You kept yours." She hesitated, then reached beneath her collar to reveal the matching one still resting against her heart. The sight of it drew something raw into his eyes, guilt, regret, maybe love. "Why come back, Jonas?" she asked softly. He exhaled, the breath heavy with unspoken truth. "Because I had to see you once more. Because I'm not the man you remember, but I can't die with that lie between us." The name, Jonas Creed, seemed to ripple through the onlookers like a cold wind. Men shifted uneasily. Mothers pulled their children inside. The sheriff leaned against a post, hand hovering near his revolver. Jonas Creed, the gunslinger who'd ridden with the Murphy gang. The man who'd robbed stagecoaches and burned settlements for gold. The man who'd disappeared after a massacre south of the border. Clara's heart twisted. "You were supposed to find peace," she whispered. He shook his head slowly. "There's no peace where I've been. Only debts to pay, and I've been paying 'em in blood." A shiver passed through her. His coat was dark, but darker still were the stains that spread across it, fresh, glistening, alive. The smell of iron clung to him. Whose blood, Jonas? He looked past her, toward the horizon. Men who came to collect on my mistakes. His gaze returned to hers. And men who shouldn't have. For a moment, the silence between them was unbearable. Clara could hear the flutter of the saloon door, the distant call of a crow, her own breath breaking unevenly. She saw the weight he carried, the years, the sin, the unrelenting guilt, and part of her wanted to reach out to forgive. But another part, the one that had lived through his absence, burned too fiercely for that. "You shouldn't have come back," she said, voice trembling. "You will bring death with you." He stepped closer, eyes dark and tired. Death was already here. "You've just been too busy waiting to notice." Anger flared in her chest, but so did sorrow. "Don't you dare talk to me about waiting. I buried my father while you were out spilling blood for strangers. I held onto a promise that died the day you rode away." He looked down, jaw tightening. "And I carried that promise through every gunfight. Every night, I wished I'd never left. I came back to end it, Clara, for both of us." She stared at him, searching for a lie, but found none. The man before her wasn't the reckless outlaw she'd loved. He was something else, haunted, hollow, dangerous. The wind rose, carrying with it a sound from far down the road. Horses, several of them. The sheriff straightened, eyes narrowing. Jonas turned toward the horizon, his hand drifting instinctively to the gun at his hip. "They followed you here," she said, her voice breaking. He nodded once. "Murphy's men. I took something that was theirs. They'll burn this town to find me." "You mean to drag all of us into your war?" "I mean to finish it before it reaches you." He met her gaze, steady, resolute. "I swear it." The hoofbeats grew louder now, echoing off the wooden facades, a drumbeat of reckoning rolling closer with every second. Townsfolk scurried for cover. The sheriff barked orders. Clara clutched her locket, trembling. Jonas took a step back toward his horse, eyes still on her. "If I don't come back, you'll know I kept my word." She shook her head, tears streaking her dust-covered cheeks. "You've kept too many words already." He paused, hat shadowing his face. "Maybe this one will be the last that matters." And then he was gone, mounting up, the horse kicking up a storm of dust as he rode toward the setting sun. The sound of his departure echoed through the hollow streets until it was swallowed by the coming night. Clara stood alone, the torn letter drifting from her hand, landing in the dirt at her feet. The ink blurred, dark against the pale dust. She didn't pick it up. She just stared down the empty road where the man she once loved had vanished again, knowing this time the waiting would end one way or another. In Redemption Creek, no one ever came back clean. But as the wind swept through the silent town, carrying the faint scent of blood and gunpowder, Clara Boone still hoped, if not for his redemption, then for her own. Dawn crept over the plains like a dying ember, casting long, blood-colored streaks across the sky. The air was dry and sharp, heavy with the smell of smoke from distant campfires. Redemption Creek stirred uneasily, its people already whispering of what was coming. They had seen men like Jonas Creed before, men who carried death in their shadow, and they knew that death never traveled alone. Jonas stood at the edge of town, his shirt torn, his side still bleeding from the fight that had driven him here. His horse pawed at the ground, restlessly, nostrils flaring. Every muscle in his body ached, but he didn't flinch. He watched the horizon, where faint dust clouds swirled in the rising sun. They were coming. Behind him, Clara approached quietly, her shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. Her face was pale, but resolute. The night had not been kind, neither to her nor to the questions she could no longer ignore. "How far?" she asked. "Half a day, maybe less." Jonas answered without turning. His voice was hoarse, like sandpaper dragging across stone. "And you think you can stop them?" He gave a bitter smile. "Ain't about stopping them. It's about making sure they don't take more than I already owe." She stepped closer, close enough to see the tremor in his hands as he checked his revolver, reloading with deliberate care. "You're not alone in this," she said. He looked at her then, and something flickered behind his eyes, something between disbelief and admiration. You don't know what you're saying, Clara. These men ain't like the ones you read about in stories. They don't stop. They don't forgive. And you think I've been waiting 3 years just to watch you die? Her voice cracked, but there was steel beneath the sound. If you're to fight, I'll stand with you. He studied her for a long moment, the morning light glinting off the scar on his cheek. You ever fired a gun before? No, but I've buried enough people who didn't. That answer silenced him. Then, with a faint nod, he said, "There's an old trading post 2 miles east. Strong walls, good vantage. We'll make our stand there." They left the town behind, the echo of the church bell fading as they rode through the canyon. The land stretched wide and endless, scrub grass bending under the wind, vultures circling lazily overhead. Clara's hands trembled on the reins, but her eyes stayed fixed ahead. Every hoofbeat drove home a truth she had always known but never faced. Waiting for Jonas had been safer than finding him. By the time they reached the trading post, the sun was high and merciless. The place stood like a skeleton of the past, walls half-rotted, windows broken, the sign above the door barely hanging by its hinges. Yet it was shelter, and shelter was hope. Jonas dismounted first, scanning the area with a soldier's caution. "Help me move that table," he said, nodding toward the main door. They dragged it across the floor, the sound echoing in the emptiness. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight, slanting through the gaps in the boards. He showed her how to load the rifle, his voice low and steady. "You keep your eyes on the ridge. Don't fire unless they're close. And don't hesitate." She swallowed. "You sound like you've said that before." "I have," he said, tightening the bandage on his wound. "Too many times." They worked in silence for a while, preparing the traps. Jonas sprinkled broken glass across the floor near the windows. Clara tore strips of cloth for bandages, her fingers raw. There was a strange rhythm to their labor, a quiet understanding that no words could name. As the sun began to dip, the world turned to gold and fire. Then came the sound, distant but unmistakable. Hoofbeats. Many. The ground seemed to hum beneath them. Jonas checked his gun one last time. "They're here." Clara took her place behind the window, heart pounding. The Murphy gang rode in like a dust storm, 6 riders wide, their faces hidden behind scarves, their eyes glinting beneath the brims of their hats. The leader, a broad man with a scarred chin and a red bandana, raised his rifle. "Jonas Creed." His voice thundered across the open plain. "You've run long enough. Hand over what's ours, and maybe we'll leave the lady breathing." Jonas leaned out the doorway, gun raised, his tone calm. "Tell Murphy I ain't got his gold anymore. Just the bullets that come with it." A tense silence. Then the leader spat into the dust. "Then we'll take those too." Gunfire shattered the stillness. Windows exploded. Wood splintered. Clara ducked, instinctively, ears ringing. Jonas fired twice, hitting one rider square in the chest. Another fell, screaming, his horse bolting. Clara felt her hands tighten around the rifle. Without thinking, she aimed at the nearest shadow and pulled the trigger. The recoil slammed into her shoulder, but the shot found its mark. The fight was chaos, short, brutal, deafening. Jonas moved like a man possessed, every motion sharp and deliberate. He fired, ducked, reloaded. Each shot was a confession, each breath a prayer. Blood streaked the walls. The air thickened with gunpowder. When the smoke cleared, only 2 figures remained standing, Jonas swaying on his feet, blood soaking through his shirt, and Clara, trembling, her face pale, but her eyes fierce. The bodies of the Murphy gang lay scattered among the dust and broken glass. Jonas stumbled back against the wall, breathing hard. "They'll send more," he muttered. "Murphy won't let this rest." Clara crossed to him, pressing her shawl against his wound. "You can't fight them all." He gave a faint, crooked smile. "Ain't trying to fight 'em all. Just enough to keep you safe." She looked at him, really looked at him, at the man beneath the blood and regret. He wasn't the outlaw she'd loved, nor the stranger who'd returned. He was something in between, a man trying to claw his way out of damnation one act at a time. Then we need to move, she said, before night falls. He nodded weakly. There's a river south of here. If we cross before dawn, they'll lose our trail. They gathered what little they could, ammunition, water, the silver locket she refused to take off, and left the trading post behind. The ride was slow, the path winding through red canyons and dry creek beds. The world was silent except for the steady rhythm of the horses' hooves and the rasp of Jonas's uneven breathing. As the last light bled from the sky, they reached the river. It was shallow but swift, reflecting the bruised colors of the dying day. Jonas tried to cross first, but midway through he faltered, collapsing into the water. Clara leapt in after him, the current tugging at her skirts, dragging them both downstream before she could pull him onto the opposite bank. He lay on his back, gasping, eyes fixed on the fading stars. Clara knelt beside him, her hands slick with blood and river water. "You should have let me die out there," he whispered. She shook her head fiercely. "Not after all this. Not after you came back." He smiled faintly, eyes glassy. "Maybe coming back was the worst thing I ever did." "Then it's the one thing you did right," she said. They stayed like that until the moon rose, pale and cold over the desert. In the distance, a wolf howled, a lonely sound that carried across the dark. Jonas closed his eyes, and Clara leaned close, whispering, "You're not done yet." And though he didn't answer, his hand found hers, holding tight as the river murmured beside them, carrying their sins downstream toward the dawn. The dawn broke red over the horizon, spilling light across the valley like blood on water. Clara stood by the corral fence, her hands clutching the worn wood, eyes fixed on the narrow trail that wound down from the hills. The night had been long and sleepless, the kind that stretched a woman's soul thin between fear and faith. The whispers in town had reached her before the riders did, stories of a man on the run, a bounty on his head, and a body count left behind in his shadow. They said he was headed west. They said his name was Eli Cade. She told herself it couldn't be him, but in her heart she already knew. By midday, the dust cloud appeared in the distance, trailing behind a single rider. The wind carried the echo of hooves, sharp and rhythmic like a heartbeat refusing to die. She stepped back from the fence, her pulse quickening. He came into view, a dark silhouette against the glare of the sun, hat low, coat torn, his horse lathered in sweat. When he reached the gate, he dismounted slowly, favoring one leg. The dust clung to his boots, and the blood darkened his sleeve. "Eli," she whispered. He looked at her, and for a moment the weight of years vanished. The silence between them felt alive, filled with all the words they never said, and the ghosts that followed them both. His face was rougher, eyes harder, but beneath the grime and blood she could still see the man who once promised her a life of quiet mornings and open skies. "You shouldn't have come back," she said. "I didn't have much of a choice." His voice was low, graveled from the trail. "There's a price on me now, Clara. I didn't mean for it to happen," but he looked down at his hands, at the dried blood caked in the creases of his knuckles. "Things got out of hand in Dry Creek. The law thinks I killed a deputy." Her heart clenched. "Did you?" He met her gaze. "No, but I might as well have. I led them there. I made the fight happen." She turned away, her breath shallow. The wind stirred her hair as she stared out across the land. "You always said you'd never draw first, that you'd walk away before it came to blood." "I tried," he said softly, "but a man can only run so far before the past catches him." The sound of a gunshot split the air. It came from the ridge above the valley. Instinct took over. Eli lunged forward, pulling Clara down behind the corral fence as another shot whined past, splintering wood inches from her face. "They found me," he hissed. "Stay low." 3 riders appeared on the ridge, posse men, rifles slung across their backs, dust rising like smoke around their horses. Clara's breath caught in her throat. Eli checked his revolver, the cylinder clicking as he spun it. 2 bullets left. Not nearly enough. Through the barn, she whispered urgently, "There's a way out the back, by the creek." He nodded once, eyes locked on hers. "You sure you want to be part of this?" "You came back, didn't you?" she said, her voice trembling but steady. "That means I already am." They moved together, bent low, slipping through the shadows of the barn. The smell of hay and sweat filled the air. Outside, hooves pounded closer. One of the posse shouted, "Cade, we got you surrounded." Eli's jaw tightened. "No, you don't." He pushed open the rear door, guiding her toward the creek bed. But before they could reach it, a figure stepped from the brush, rifle raised, eyes cold. "Drop it, Cade." Eli froze. The man was close enough now for Clara to see the star pinned to his vest. Sheriff Danner, the same lawman Eli once rode beside, before greed and gunfire tore the badge from his chest. "Danner," Eli said quietly, "you don't have to do this. You killed one of my men." "I told you it wasn't." Danner fired. The shot struck Eli's shoulder, spinning him backward. Clara screamed, catching him before he fell. Blood spread fast through his coat, dark and wet. He gritted his teeth, struggling to stay upright. "Run, Clara," he gasped. "Now." She shook her head. "Not without you." Another bullet tore through the barn wall. The air filled with splinters and smoke. Eli raised his revolver, firing back, once, twice, until the hammer clicked empty. Danner staggered, clutching his side, but stayed on his feet. Eli's knees buckled. He sank against the post, breathing hard. "You always wanted me to come home," he said weakly, blood on his lips. "Guess I finally did." Tears blurred her vision. She pressed her hands against the wound, trying to stop the flow. "Don't you dare leave me again," she whispered. Outside, the posse shouted, closing in. She could hear the clatter of boots, the metallic snap of rifles being cocked. Time was running out. Eli looked up at her, eyes fierce despite the pain. "There's one horse left in the stable. Take it. Ride west. Don't stop until you reach the river." "I won't go," she said, her voice breaking. "Not while you." He caught her hand, squeezing hard. "Clara, please. You were always the best part of me. Don't waste that." The barn doors burst open. Light flooded in, blinding and hot. Danner stepped through, gun drawn, his shadow stretching long across the floor. Clara rose, standing between them. Her heart pounded like thunder. "You'll have to shoot through me first." Danner hesitated. "He's an outlaw." "He's a man," she said fiercely, "and you were supposed to be his friend." For a heartbeat, no one moved. The only sound was the wind whistling through the rafters and the slow drip of blood onto dirt. Then Danner's eyes softened just a fraction. He lowered the gun. "Get out of here," he muttered, "before I change my mind." Clara didn't wait. She helped Eli onto the horse, every movement sharp with urgency. The posse shouted behind them, confusion spreading, but the moment they cleared the fence, she drove her heels into the horse's flank. The animal surged forward, hooves thundering against the hard earth. They rode until the sun dipped low, the sky bruised in gold. At last, near the river, Eli slumped in her arms, breath ragged and fading. She pulled him close, tears falling freely now. "Hold on," she whispered. "We're almost there." He smiled faintly. "I told you once. I'd come back." His voice was a rasp, didn't say for how long. The river murmured beside them, its waters red with sunset. She held him as his breathing slowed, until the last sound he made was a sigh, half pain, half peace. When she finally let go, the stars had begun to bloom across the sky. She looked down at her hands, stained with dust and his blood. "She waited in the dust," she murmured to the night, "and he returned with blood on his hands." Then she stood, turned toward the west, and walked on alone, but unbroken, carrying his name like a heartbeat against the wind. And maybe that's what love was out here on the frontier, not the promise of forever, but the courage to keep walking after the bullet stopped.